So Tales of the Empire just came out this past Saturday, and I gotta say, I really enjoyed it. I saw some stuff online. I was trying to avoid all the spoilers and all that. I really didn't see anything plot-wise, but I did see some general, complaining about it and ragging on it, and I don't know if it's just because Tales of the Jedi was just a little bit better, but I was expecting there to be a drop-off. I was expecting to be disappointed, honestly, with the way people were talking about it. Everyone was just being super dramatic. Now, I did prefer Tales of the Jedi to Tales of the Empire, but I still really enjoyed Tales of the Empire. The difference is not that big. At the time of this recording, I haven't seen any specific complaints that people have had about the plot or anything, but part of me doesn't even really want to know. I do want to look up people's complaints to see what people are saying, so maybe I can get a better grasp on the situation, but there's a part of me that knows that people are just going to be ridiculous and they're going to be complaining about things that are just unnecessary, things that aren't as bad as they make them out to be. And that's how it is with a lot of things, but Star Wars fans can be especially egregious sometimes, and I just like to stay on the positive side of Star Wars fandom if I can. But putting that aside, I want to talk about some of the specific things that I enjoyed from this show. Number one being, the quality of animation just continues to get better for each and every Star Wars show. It looked beautiful. And speaking of beautiful animation, we got the new model for General Grievous that was introduced in the first episode of Bad Batch in the intro, and it's nice that they were able to put that model to better use, especially since we only got it for a second or two. It's nice to have General Grievous back in any capacity, always nice to have more of that character, and it's cool to have Matthew Wood back to voice him, as he's voiced him in everything. I got to meet Matthew Wood briefly at a Comic-Con last year, and ever since then I just want to see more of him. And when I do see him, it's just even more exciting because I have that whole new perspective now. And General Grievous is really just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to returning characters that made an appearance of this show, both as main characters and as just side characters. So let's talk about those characters and their appearance in this show and the story that surrounds them. I think I'm gonna start off with Morgan Elsbeth's half of the show, just because it's the first part. Morgan Elsbeth is an interesting character that we got to see in Mando Season 2 and in Ahsoka. And we know how her story ends, but I think she's a good candidate for this show to flesh out her character and show us her beginning. Having her be one of the Night Sisters that were present on Dathomir during the Separatist attack, I think just connects with audiences and it gives you more of an understanding of her motivation and her drive. Now, whether or not you sympathize with her, that's up to you, because the Night Sisters weren't necessarily pure of heart. They weren't necessarily victims, even though they did get wiped out. That being said, most of the wrath they did incur was the result of Mother Talzin and Ventress's meddling with Sidious's plans. So a character like Morgan Elsbeth can be sympathetic in the same way that a character like Finn can be sympathetic. Both were raised in orders that opposed our heroes. But what makes Finn a little bit more sympathetic is that when the time came for him to choose, he did choose to do the right thing. And as we know, Morgan Elsbeth never does. With all that being said though, Morgan Elsbeth was a great candidate for this show. She's already an integral character in different Star Wars stories, but this fleshes out her character as a whole, and it gives you more insight into her origin, her relationship with the Empire and with Thrawn, and all these other things that we only heard about. And even though we did know some of these things about her already, that she was related to the Night Sisters in some form or fashion, and that she had a relationship with Thrawn was her master, it's nice to see these things, because what that does for the character is give her depth. Something that she was lacking when we saw her in Mandalorian Season 2 and Ahsoka. She was very much a surface level villain, a surface level character, and now she's a fleshed out character. And I think that goes a long way. I am also happy for Diana. I got to meet her at Comic-Con back in January, and she just came off as this person who was just really excited to be a part of Star Wars and had admiration for Star Wars. And I just love when people like that are involved, because it makes the whole process better. It makes the content better. Just knowing that the people behind the camera really care. For the sake of the video, I'm going to refer to these as arcs. The Morgan Elsbeth arc and the Barriss Offee arc. Even though they're not really arcs, they're anthology that just focus on a particular character, I'm gonna address it that way just to make it easier. The Morgan Elsbeth arc also did bring in some other interesting characters that it was nice to see again and nice to see more of. One of the big ones being Grand Admiral Thrawn, or as I should say, Admiral Thrawn in this show. This is before he becomes Grand Admiral, and this is when they first meet. And it's very interesting, the backstory there, because as we see in Rebels, Grand Admiral Thrawn has the whole TIE Defender program going on, and that's a big part of that show. Season 3 and 4 has that as a big focus. And in Tales of the Empire, we see that it was Morgan Elsbeth who came up with the idea for the TIE Defender and the design. And Thrawn recruited her for her intelligence and for her ambition. And that's an interesting connection we've seen drawn between different points in different shows, because we know from The Mandalorian Season 2 that Morgan Elsbeth helped build the Imperial Navy, and now we know specifically what. And I really like that that lines up with Rebels so well, because it just strengthens the fact that Thrawn was her master for so long. It doesn't feel like something that was introduced later. It feels continuity-wise fluid. Another character that it's nice to see again and nice to see more of is Captain Pellaeon. In Star Wars Rebels, the finale of Season 4, the finale of the show, he's only name dropped. And then in The Mandalorian Season 3, he's a part of the council that Moff Gideon goes to. But people who have read a lot of Star Wars books know that character a lot better than he's portrayed on screen. And that's not to say he hasn't been portrayed well on screen, it's just that he hasn't had the opportunity to be on screen very much. So I think fans of the books are just excited to see more of him, and excited to have him be an actual character in animation and live action. And he's not the only person we see that's associated with Thrawn. We also get the return of Rook in Clone Wars animation, and he looks great. We saw him in Rebels, obviously, and we saw him perish in Rebels, but it's nice to see him in this show when he's still alive. One problem I do have, one little gripe I do have, is Rook loses a lot. He's Thrawn's assassin, but he loses to Kanan, he loses to Ezra, and he loses to Zeb and Sabine. And it just feels like he should win a fight, you know? I don't know how I feel about Morgan Elsbeth defeating him. Now, I do know she's capable, and especially in this show, we see that she's capable, going back to her days as a Night Sister. And then we see her be capable in Ahsoka and The Mandalorian Season 2. But I don't know, I just feel like I hold Rook to this high standard because he does give people trouble. Even though he loses a lot of his one-on-ones with big characters, he does give people trouble. And he did give Morgan Elsbeth trouble. I don't know, I just feel like he needs to win a fight one day. But again, Morgan Elsbeth has always been capable every time we see her, so it really doesn't bother me that she beat Rook. Not really. When push comes to shove, it's fine. The last person I want to mention that they brought back for this portion of the show is Wing Ti Chow, who reprised his role as Wing, or Governor Wing. And I like that they brought him back because it definitely fleshes out that character a lot more. When you see him in The Mandalorian Season 2, you kind of see him as a good Samaritan, someone who's willing to help out, but you don't really have any connection to that character other than, you know, your connection to anyone who's just in need. But it was nice to see him in this show because it definitely gives you more insight into his role in the town and his character. I also found it interesting that while looking up the character's name, the character has the same first name as the actor, if not the same full name, and the actor isn't really what you'd call an actor. He's a former Disney Imagineer and Disney legend who helped expand Disney parks in different parts of the world, etc. And I thought that was really interesting. You see that every now and again, that Disney will, you know, kind of, I don't want to say reward one of their, you know, lifelong employees and contributors, but that's kind of how it is that sometimes they'll just do them favors. And I just thought that was an interesting tidbit because I had no idea. In this Morgan Elsbeth arc, we also get introduced to a whole new faction of people who live on Dathomir. And I think that's super interesting because when you think about the Clone Wars arcs and all the times we see Dathomir, you kind of have this one vision of how it is. You have the Night Sisters who are in control, and then you have the Night Brothers who reside on some other part of the world, and they're taken as mates. But as Obi-Wan says in Clone Wars, it's no secret that the Night Sisters are more powerful than the Night Brothers, and they can only do what the Night Sisters allow them to do. It's super interesting now to go back and think about all the times that we hear about the Witches of Dathomir, but not necessarily the Night Sisters by name. How many of these instances are we talking about the witches as a whole? Because the mother of the Mountain Clan is also a witch of some kind. She uses force magic of some kind. And so all these times that we hear about the Witches of Dathomir, are we talking about the Night Sisters specifically or just in general? And another thing is, how aware of the Mountain Clan were the Night Sisters or anyone else? Maybe no one even knew about the Mountain Clan. And so all those references to the Witches of Dathomir were about the Night Sisters. But I mean, we don't really know. All in all, I really enjoyed the Morgan Elsbeth arc that we got, and I'm really glad we got to go more in depth with some of these characters and even introduce new concepts that we haven't seen before. But moving on, now I want to talk about the Barriss Offee arc. I really enjoyed this arc. I don't know if I enjoyed it more than the Morgan Elsbeth arc in totality, but it was really good. And like the Morgan Elsbeth arc, it's really good to see more of Barriss, to flesh her character out even more. Even though I feel she was already a bit more fleshed out than Morgan Elsbeth was, it's still just nice to see her again, nice to see more of her story, and to have the original voice actress back. I think that Barriss becoming an Inquisitor definitely is a good story choice, and it tracks with where we leave her character in Clone Wars. It's a logical next progression for her character, and it's just so interesting to see her journey from the light to the dark, which we already saw, further into the dark in this show, and then see her come out the other end in the light at the end of her life. And I say the end of her life, I believe she survived in the final episode of this show, but what I mean is just for the future, you know, after this show, the stuff we don't see, she'll remain in the light, I think. And with Barriss becoming an Inquisitor, I'm really glad we just got to see more of the Order of Inquisitors as a whole. We got to see some of its formation, and even some of the construction of what I believe was Fortress Inquisitorius. And we just get to see some of the missions they go on, and some more of the Inquisitors we don't really get to see much of. And the one I'm mainly talking about is Lyn, or the Fourth Sister. She was basically a glorified background extra in Kenobi. I don't think she had any lines, maybe one line, but other than that, she was like a featured extra. She was in the scenes and she was there, you know. She was a character, but not a character, if you know what I'm saying. And so it's nice to get more of her and have her be an actual Inquisitor that we follow to some degree and get information on. And I'm really happy that she presumably was able to come back to the light in the end as well. But who knows, maybe we'll find that out in a future story, or maybe it's up to interpretation. I'm really glad we're getting some Inquisitors that aren't just evil. You've got Lyn, you've got Barriss, you've got Reva, who eventually find their way out of the darkness. Now whether that means back to the light is, you know, it remains to be seen, but out of the darkness is a start, and it's a good thing. And I'm glad that we're getting that, because if we're to believe that all these Inquisitors are former Jedi, which they are, because Reva was the youngest of them and she was a youngling, so there's no way we're just recruiting Force sensitives and making them Inquisitors. There wouldn't be enough time. All of the Inquisitors are Jedi, former Jedi. And so it's nice to see that not all of them just completely abandoned their ways. Some of them, you know, were pressed into service. Some of them were deceived into thinking they were doing the right thing. And some of them find their way back out of the darkness, and I'm glad to see that. But we also get to see an Inquisitor in this show, a familiar face, who doesn't find his way back and remains in the dark, and that's the Grand Inquisitor. I really love the Grand Inquisitor in Rebels, and I'm happy to see more of him, especially in animation. And the reason why I'm happy to see him specifically in animation is that they really fumbled the bag with Kenobi. Jason Isaacs came back to reprise his role as the Grand Inquisitor in Tales of the Empire, and he should have done it in Kenobi. He wanted to do it in Kenobi. He would have looked better doing it in Kenobi. He would have had the right voice in Kenobi. I don't know what the heads of Disney were thinking whenever they recast him in Kenobi. I've heard all the excuses. Oh, the Grand Inquisitor has fight choreography, and we need a younger actor, someone more experienced with fight choreography. Something like that. Well, guess what? Jason Isaacs wouldn't have had to do any fight choreography because the Grand Inquisitor didn't have any. He really just walked around. That's the most physical thing he did in that show. So, I mean, that's bogus. I could make a whole video talking about my disappointment in the Grand Inquisitor in Kenobi, but I'm not gonna do that here. I'm not gonna keep going with it, but let it be known that I'm just happy that Jason Isaacs is back, because he never should have left. We even get to see a couple more Inquisitors in this show. Merrick and the Inquisitor that Ahsoka destroyed in Tales of the Jedi. And don't get me wrong, it's good to see more Inquisitors, especially when we're seeing the origins of the Order of Inquisitors. It's important that you see more than just Barriss and Lyn and the Grand Inquisitor. But my gripe is, it would have been nice to see the Seventh Sister, or the Fifth Brother, or even one of the ones from Fallen Order. It feels like we saw the one Inquisitor that Ahsoka killed because they already had his model, and we saw Merrick because of recency. but it would have been nice to see the fifth brother or seventh sister to have that Rebels tie-in a little bit more than just the Grand Inquisitor. And I have a problem with Star Wars. They always want to do these crossovers and these connections between shows and movie to show, movie to movie, but guess what? The games just don't get any connections. I feel like we could have had an Inquisitor from Fallen Order in here easily, and that would be a tie-in, a fun little Easter egg for fans of the games, or people who have only played the games and are just getting into Star Wars, you know? But we just don't do that. It's kind of like the Battlefront 2 campaign. I've been wanting Iden Versio to pop up in a show or a movie for ages, and I just don't know if it's ever gonna happen. They modeled the character after the actress, and they're just letting that go to waste. Please, we need some game tie-ins eventually. But I did enjoy seeing the training and graduation process of the Inquisitors, and I also enjoyed seeing Barris's mission, where she discovered that she's not one of them. She still deep down had a kind heart and wanted to help people, and even if she was confused and fell into darkness for a time, that was her true self. And I'm glad that we got to see that. And ultimately, she was able to bring Lynn back to the light as well, presumably. And if this is the last we see of Barris, I think that's a beautiful way to wrap up her story. Whether she lived or died, it's nice to know that she was able to do the right thing, and she was able to come back to the light and help someone else to do the same. It's kind of like what Charles Xavier said in one of the X-Men movies. Just because someone stumbles and loses their way doesn't mean they're lost forever. This arc didn't really have any more returning characters other than Vader and some of the clones. And it's kind of depressing because all the good times you're gonna have with Vader and the clones are gone. You know, the Clone Wars has ended, and now we're just getting depressing clone stories. We have clones on the wrong side, and we've got Anakin who's fallen to the dark side. It is nice to see him, and it's especially nice that they got to use that Vader model a little bit more after Season 7 of Clone Wars, but it is kind of sad thinking about how all the good times are gone. All in all, I really enjoyed the Barriss arc. Like I said earlier, I'm not sure which arc I prefer, but what I will say gives the Barriss arc an advantage is that the final episode of the Barriss arc, the final episode of the show, is my favorite of the season. I think it was just super satisfying to me to see Barriss come back to the light and be the Jedi or positive light side Force user that she always could be. And it was even cool to see her fight like Ezra did in Ahsoka without a lightsaber and just block with the Force. I think that's super cool to see. But to reiterate what I stated at the beginning of this video, Tales of the Empire was really good. It might not be as good as Tales of the Jedi, but I really think people were getting all twisted up inside over nothing. This show turned out really good. If you just don't expect it to be 100% Rotten Tomatoes good, then you'll have a good time. I really hope we get a third Tales of something, whether it's Tales of the Jedi Season 2, or Tales of this, Tales of that, maybe Tales of the Sith specifically, rather than just the Empire. But I really hope we get that, because it's a good way to have anthology mixed into Star Wars. It's a good way to get background on stuff. It's a good way to continue stories without having to have a full fleshed out, 20 episode season of a show, or even a 16 episode season of a show like Bad Batch. You can just have it in a few episodes, and sometimes that's all you need. But I think that's all I've got to say about Tales of the Empire today, so I'm gonna wrap this video up. If you stuck around for this long, thank you so much. A like, comment, subscription, anything helps. I'm trying to grow the channel slowly but surely. I'm gonna keep pumping out these videos, so if you wanna wait around for the next one, subscribe. I have some other Star Wars videos and even other franchises here and there if you're interested in any of those. So until next time, bye.